السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد أشرف الخلق وسيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم بارك لنا في جمعنا هذا، اللهم اجعل جمعنا هذا جمعا مباركا مرحوما، واجعل تفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما، ولا تجعل فينا ولا منا ولا معنا شقيا ولا محروما. اللهم حبب إلينا الإيمان وزينه في قلوبنا، وكره إلينا الكفر والفسوق والعصيان، واجعلنا من عبادك الراشدين. اللهم ارزقنا حبك وحب من يحبك وحب كل عمل يقربنا إلى حبك. اللهم ارزقنا محبتك ومحبة نبيك، محبة تنجينا بها يوم الدين. Oh Allah, we ask you to fill our hearts with your abundant mercy, and to fill our homes with your abundant mercy, and to bless us with steadfastness and guidance. Oh Allah, bless us with understanding the words of our dearly beloved Prophet ﷺ. Bless us with his love and the love of everyone you love and the love of every action you love. Oh Allah, bless us to draw closer to you with understanding the words of our dearly beloved Prophet ﷺ and living by them and practicing them in our lives. Oh Allah, we ask you to facilitate for us our affairs, to help us navigate through every trial and difficulty in life, and to make the best of our days the last of our days, the best of our actions the last of our actions, and the best of all days the day we meet you and you're pleased with us. Allahumma ameen. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Amma ba'd. Brothers and sisters, we've been discussing different hadith of our dearly beloved Prophet ﷺ, briefly reflecting on them, spiritual reflections, trying to keep it brief and simple. And the purpose of this gathering is to develop a love for the Prophet ﷺ and an understanding of the merit of his words in the spectrum of the teachings of our deen. We want to connect with the words of our Prophet. We want to understand what he said. We want to draw closer to him and his practice. And many of the things that our dearly beloved Prophet ﷺ said set the foundations for Islam, because his words are wahi, his words are revelation. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. The Prophet ﷺ was given the jawami'ul kalim, the ability to describe lofty concepts, vast concepts in few words. And this is from his wisdom sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And so far we've shared two hadith relating to Jawami'ul Kalim, and today I'll introduce a third. And many of these hadith can be found in a book that's well known to probably many of you, and that is the 40 Nawawi hadiths. The hadiths that we're going to discuss in this gathering are not limited to the 40 Nawawi hadiths, and that's why I did not title it an explanation of the 40 Nawawi hadiths. And I'm not going in order with the 40 Nawawi hadiths. If you don't know this book, then go look it up, because every hadith that is in the 40 Nawawis relates to one of the foundations of Islam. It's something that you should thoroughly understand, and it's available in English, and its commentary is available in English. Just look it up on Amazon. You'll find commentary on the 40 Nawawi hadiths, and inshallah you'll find great benefit in that book, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. The hadith today states the following: عن أبي هريرة عبد الرحمن بن صخر رضي الله تعالى عنه قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول. And make sure in this gathering that whenever you hear the Prophet ﷺ's name, that you say صلى الله عليه وسلم. سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول ما نهيتكم عنه فاجتنبوه وما أمرتكم به فأتوا منه ما استطعتم فإنما أهلك الذين من قبلكم كثرة مسائلهم واختلافهم على أنبيائهم. In this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says the following. First, the narrator of this hadith is a very well-known companion, and that is Sayyidina Abu Hurairah. And his actual name is Abdul Rahman ibn Sakhr. So Sayyidina Abu Hurairah narrates that he heard the Prophet ﷺ say, whatever I have forbidden you to do, then avoid it. And whatever I've commanded you to do, then do of it what you're capable of doing. فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ فَإِنَّمَا أَهْلَكَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. What ruined the nations or the people before you are كَثْرَةُ مَسَائِلِهِمْ, the multitude of issues that they would bring forth to their messengers, وَاخْتِلَافُهُمْ عَلَى أَنْبِيَائِهِمْ. And with the multitude of these issues that they would present to their messengers, they would then disagree with them and refuse to follow. This is a very comprehensive hadith of our Prophet ﷺ that our scholars say plays into so many different issues in our deen. This is Imam al-Nawawi, he comments on this hadith, he says, هذا من قواعد الإسلام المهمة ومن جوامع الكلم التي أعطيها صلى الله عليه وسلم ويدخل فيه ما لا يحصى من الأحكام. This hadith, if you wanted to write a book about it, you can write a book about it. This hadith sets one of the foundations of Islam. And it tells us how to deal with so many different issues. He says so many issues enter under the understanding of this hadith. And in this gathering, of course, we don't mean to make it an academic gathering. It's meant to be more spiritual. We're going to share a few things that relate to it, but we're going to leave out a lot of other things. Now, to begin explaining the hadith, as I said before, whenever we discuss a hadith, if the narrator is someone who we haven't mentioned before, I will always mention a brief bio for that narrator. And today, the companion is very well known, and that is Sayyidina Abu Hurairah. I'm sure everyone here, or maybe perhaps most people here, know Sayyidina Abu Hurairah. Is that correct? Is anyone here hearing of Abu Hurairah for the very first time? Very first time? Everyone knows Abu Hurairah here. Alhamdulillah ta'ala. Sayyidina Abu Hurairah, his name is Abdul Rahman ibn Sakhr. Now, was he born with the name Abdul Rahman? Does anyone know? Was he born with the name Abdul Rahman? No? Okay, if you say no, then what was his actual name? His name was Abdu Shams, the slave, which literally means the slave of the sun. And this was before his Islam. But after he became Muslim, he changed his name from Abdu Shams to Abdul Rahman. Where did he get Abu Hurairah from? The obvious answer to this, I hope at least some of you know. Why was he given the kunya of Abu Hurairah? You know? Who? No, he did not have a son named Hurairah. Yes. Because of his cat? Because he loved cats. And in fact, there's a number of companions who were given titles, even though they did not have sons with those names. We already discussed one of them. That's Sayyidina Umar. His name was Abu Hafs. And he was called Abu Hafs not because he had a son named Hafs, and it wasn't because of his daughter named Hafsa, but it was because Hafs means lion. And he was referred to as the father of the lion because he was a very strong man. He was a powerful man. فَكُنِّيَ بِأَبِي حَفْص. Right. Same thing with Sayyidina Abu Hurairah. Because of his love of cats, he was referred to as such. And that's because he found a cat and he put that cat in one of his sleeves. And so the Prophet ﷺ himself gave him that name, Abu Hurairah. And the Prophet ﷺ would call him Abahir. The Prophet ﷺ would call him Abahir, meaning male cat. Hir is a male cat, right? Hirra is a female cat, right? Hurairah, this is tasghir. This is a term of endearment, as it's known in Arabic language. So this is Sayyidina Abu Hurairah is kunya. Now, Sayyidina Abu Hurairah, was he one of as-sabiqun al-awwalun? Was he one of the first Muslims? No? When did he become Muslim? The year 7, mashallah, the year 7, which was the year of Ghazwat Khaybar. When the Prophet ﷺ went out to Khaybar, Sayyidina Abu Hurairah became Muslim in the year 7 after Hijrah, by the way. So, towards the very end of the Prophet ﷺ's life. Prophet ﷺ passed away in the 11th year after Hijrah. Abu Hurairah became Muslim 4 years before the Prophet ﷺ passed away. Can you believe this? So this is something to note about Sayyidina Abu Hurairah. When you hear of Abu Hurairah, besides him being the father of the cat, what immediately comes to your mind? What should everyone here know about Abu Hurairah? His hadith, and what relates to the hadith, the strength of his? Yes, the strength of his memory. He is the most prolific narrator an Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He had very strong memory, and this is by the blessing of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam's dua for him. Sayyidina Abu Hurairah was one of the companions who memorized thousands of hadith on the account of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And he only spent 4 years with him during his lifetime. Abu Hurairah one day came to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam and was very sad because he told his mother about Islam and she rejected. And not only did she reject, she said things about the Prophet ﷺ that hurt him. So he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he told him about the situation. And he said, O Prophet of Allah, make dua for my mother that she becomes Muslim. When you hear these types of stories, it shows you how human the companions were. They had struggles just like perhaps many of us many of us deal with such struggles. Whether your parents are non-Muslim or your parents are just not practicing, and Allah blesses you with practice, and you wish that they follow they come closer to the deen as well, but they do not have that attitude. So he asked the Prophet ﷺ to make dua for her, and the Prophet ﷺ made dua for the mother of Abu Hurairah. And he went back to his mom, and he found that something unique happened, that her heart opened up to the message, and she became Muslim. And this is by the blessings of the dua of the Prophet ﷺ for the mother of Abu Hurairah. Those are a few things about the life of Abu Hurairah that everyone should know. You should know about the strength of his memory, about him being the most prolific narrator of hadith. You should know his kunya and when he became Muslim, and the story of the Islam of his mother. There's so much other things that we can say about the life of Abu Hurairah. We're just going to leave it with that because we have a little bit of time with this hadith. Now this hadith says the following. I'm going to say it to you again. First, it speaks about prohibitions. The first part of this hadith says, when you hear that something is prohibited, avoid it outright. And then, when you hear a command from the Prophet ﷺ or from our deen in general, your attitude, your mindset should be that I am going to try to fulfill this to the best of my ability. All right, now this, you see there's a difference here. It said, when it came to nahi and prohibition, فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ, avoid it, outright, that's it, end of it, فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ. When you hear of something prohibited, avoid it, outright, that's it, end of story. Now, when it comes to fulfilling the commands, now this is, in the statements of the Prophet ﷺ, the recognition that we as human beings, sometimes our actions are below par, and we're far from perfect, and we have a lot of deficiency. So the Prophet ﷺ says, your mindset still should be فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Try your best to fulfill the command of Allah Azza wa Jal. And then the hadith goes on to say something that can be easily misunderstood or misconstrued. The Prophet ﷺ tells us why people before us have been ruined. Why have nations been ruined? What has been the source of the ruin of many people, many human beings? فَإِنَّمَا أَهْلَكَ الَّذِينَ مِن قَبْلِكُمْ كَثْرَةُ مَسَائِلِهِمْ. Them bringing forth a lot of issues, a lot of questions, and then disagreeing with their prophets. This might be misconstrued in the minds of some. That is, basically the hadith is saying, don't ask questions, just listen and obey. But it's not that simple. The hadith is much more deep, is much deeper than that. Now, I don't want to get into that end part until the very end. I want to introduce a few things first. Now, when it comes to prohibitions, the Prophet ﷺ said, avoid prohibitions. Now, when there's a nahi, the scholars, they say, and this is a little bit fiqhi, there's a little bit fiqhi tangent in the beginning. The scholars, they teach us that when it comes to prohibitions, you have things in the deen that are outright prohibited, that if you do them, you fall into sin, and this is what we call haram. And there's other things that are prohibited that you shouldn't do, but their prohibition doesn't reach to the level of sin. And we call this what? What do we call this? If it's not haram and it's prohibited, it's makruh. All right, so you notice that the makruh is something manhi anhu. The something that is offensive and disliked or something that is abhorred is manhi anhu. It's something that you should avoid. Many people, when they hear makruh, they mean, oh, that means I could do it. Yay. No, but that's not the case, right? Makruh doesn't mean go ahead and do it. Makruh means you should avoid it. But if you do it, then in that case you're not going to get sin. That's the attitude here that the hadith is setting. Now before that, why did the Prophet ﷺ say this? There's a few hadith that are very interesting that I want us to reflect on here. The first hadith, it says here that the Prophet ﷺ gave a khutbah one day. And he told the companions, أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ قَدْ فَرَضَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكُمُ الْحَجَّ فَحُجُّوا. O people, Allah has made Hajj obligatory upon you, so perform Hajj. And one of the companions asked a question that the Prophet ﷺ did not like. He asked the Prophet ﷺ, أَكُلُّ عَامٍ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ, do we have to perform Hajj every year, O Prophet of Allah? He asked the question, and here's the thing. Revelation is still coming. During the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, revelation is still coming down. And of course, if the Prophet ﷺ answered yes, what would happen? The companions would be required to comply, because the Prophet ﷺ gave them a directive. And everything he says is wahy and revelation. The Prophet ﷺ paused. فَسَكَتَ حَتَّى قَالَهَا ثَلَاثًا. The individual repeated this question 3 times. And then the Prophet ﷺ instructed him, لَوْ قُلْتُ نَعَمْ لَوَجَبَتْ وَلَمَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. If I said yes, it would have become an obligation. And you would not be able to comply. It would be grave difficult. Imagine if you had money, or if you were capable, you had to do Hajj every single year, it would be a great difficulty, right? So, لَوْ قُلْتُ نَعَمْ لَوَجَبَتْ. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, ذَرُونِي مَا تَرَكْتُكُمْ. Leave me be. As long as I don't introduce new commands and new prohibitions, leave me be. فَإِنَّمَا هَلَكَ مَنْ كَانَ قَبْلَكُمْ بِكَثْرَةِ سُؤَالِهِمْ وَاخْتِلَافِهِمْ. People have gone down this path. They started asking many questions of their prophets. They got the answer, and here's the thing. They were not pleased with the answer. And that's what led to their ruin. Was it the fact that they asked the question? No. But the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us, for the companions who were alive during the time of revelation, be careful of what you ask. Because if you ask the question, perhaps you might not like the answer. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this in the Quran. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَسْأَلُوا عَنْ أَشْيَاءَ إِن تُبْدَ لَكُمْ تَسُؤْكُمْ. O you who believe, don't ask about things that if they were made clear to you, they would bring you great inconvenience and great harm. لا تسألوا عن أشياء إن تبدأ لكم تسؤكم وإن تسألوا عنها حين ينزل القرآن تبدأ لكم. And if you ask about those questions when the Quran is being revealed, then know for certain the answer is going to come your way, and you might not handle the answer. Now, this was for the companions. Revelation isn't continuing now. So when you're asking about your deen, that concern of new commands coming isn't there, because اكتملت الشريعة. Sharia is complete now, and that concern is no longer there. However, is there still something that I could benefit from this? Yes, there's an attitude that the Prophet ﷺ is telling us to deal with things. The Prophet ﷺ is telling us to deal with our relationships at face value. Don't investigate further and try to bring out the intentions of people and try to bring out what Allah has made concealed. This is a very, very important attitude to have in all of our relationships. Because as they say, it relates to bad assumptions on one end, and it relates to a whole bunch of other things. Bad assumptions is a disease of the heart. Having bad assumptions of others is a disease of a heart. When you see a frown in your brother's face, in your sister's face, when they do something that you do not understand, and you can easily interpret in a wrong way, then here, what the Prophet ﷺ is teaching you here, no, deal with things at face value. As long as it's not clear to you and it's not been made known to you, leave it as it is. And another example of that is sometimes, in relationships, and people, they develop a mistrust of each other. And when that mistrust is there, sometimes they begin investigating and searching, what is this person doing behind my back? And in fact, there is a story of Sayyidina Umar, and they mentioned this during the Khilafah of Sayyidina Umar. Sayyidina Umar, hearing the sound of a man who seems under the influence, and he jumped over into his home, and he was going to punish him for being intoxicated. This hadith, and this story mentions that this man was very witty and intelligent. He knew how to get out of the punishment. He said to Sayyidina Umar, if I've done one wrongdoing, you've done multiple wrongdoings. And he listed to him a few different things. One of these things is you breached the sanctity of my home without my permission, right? So anyway, what I'm trying to say here is certain things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not made known to you. And one of the things that this hadith helps us understand is that when it comes to your relationships, you deal with things at face value. Maybe perhaps someone has done something wrong behind you, or has done something wrong to hurt you. But you do not know of this thing, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us, deal with things as they appear and leave what is concealed and what is in the hearts of people to Allah Azza wa Jal. Okay. So this is a very important benefit from the hadith. Now going back to prohibitions. Now the companions, they teach us an attitude. As we said, the Prophet ﷺ said, مَا نَهَيْتُكُمْ عَنْهُ فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ. This is a very important attitude to have towards nahi. The nahi is a red zone. The prohibitions are a red zone. You don't want to cross into that red zone. But when dealing with the prohibitions, it's very important to understand that even what's makruh is something that you should avoid. Because the companions, not only did they avoid makruh, they even avoided much of mubah. As it says in one of their statements, it's reported on the account of Sayyidina Umar, كُنَّا نَتْرُكُ تِسْعَةَ أَعْشَارِ الْحَلَالِ مَخَافَةَ أَن نَقَعَ فِي الْحَرَامِ. The companions, because they had that attitude in their life. Some people, they have the attitude, hey, you know what, Shaykh, just tell me, is it halal or is it haram? Just give me the bottom line. Don't give me conditions or mash'arif. Don't beat around the bush. Just tell me, is it halal or haram? And this person doesn't understand what's in their interest. Because it's not about what's halal, what's haram in your relationship with Allah Azza wa Jal. It's about what's most pleasing to Him. It's about the impact of that attitude and on your life. So this is how we build a culture of ihsan. No, don't ask about simply what's halal and what's haram. No, avoid even things that are doubt, and that's what are doubtful, and that's what the essence of wara' is. And that's why the prohibition here, the instruction from the Prophet ﷺ is, when you hear something displeasing to Allah, then avoid it. Try to root it out of your life. Right? And the more you're able to do this, the more you'll find the barakah and the blessings in your practice and in your relationships and in your pursuits. Brothers and sisters, when discussing this hadith, the scholars, they mention that there are different types of categories when it comes to things that we enjoy in life. Now there's one category that is considered tahsiniyat, luxuries of life. Things that if you don't have them, they won't create inconvenience. They're just comforts, luxuries. Right? There's another category that's referred to as hajiyat, things that are needs, that if you don't have these needs, it creates a great deal of inconvenience, but you can still live. Then there's something called darurat or daruriyat. These are necessities. These are things that if you don't have them, it will put you in a very perilous state. You might lose your life, you might lose a limb, you won't be able to live under those circumstances. They are necessities for life. Now, of course, these three categories, there's a lot of academic detail regarding them. But I'm not going to go into that. I want to give you, I guess, a way to understand these words of the Prophet. The Prophet ﷺ tells us to avoid what has been made prohibited. Is there any circumstance under which an individual can do something that is normally prohibited? That's the question. Is there any, you think of the example. There's examples from the Quran. Is there any circumstance that allows someone to do something that is normally prohibited? The Prophet ﷺ tells us to avoid prohibitions. Can you think of an example? Yeah. Yes. So the hadith, the verse is talking about أكل الميتة للمضطر. Unless the only thing you're going to find in the middle of the desert is a pig, which is very unlikely. But the point is, the verse is talking about أكل الميتة للمضطر. Now this is an example of in which something that is normally prohibited has been made allowed. And that is when the individual is in the middle of the desert and he only has access to something that is normally haram, like an animal that hasn't been slaughtered, al-mayta, hasn't been properly slaughtered, and the only way he'll live in that circumstance is if he eats it. Is it allowed for him to eat it? The answer is, the Quran says yes. But that is something that is a extenuating circumstance. That's a special circumstance. Is there another example that you can think of from the Quran, not going anywhere outside of the Quran? Any other example? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yeah? What happened? Of course, the Quran wouldn't mention diabetes, but there's some verses that are indirectly mentioning Ahl al-A'dhar in Surah Al-Baqarah from Siyam, those who find وعلى الذين يطيقونه فدية طعام مساكين أو فدية طعام مسكين. Both are qira'at of the Quran. So anyway, that's an example. The other obvious example in the Quran is إلا من أكره وقلبه مطمئن بالإيمان. For the companions in the early days, when they would announce their Islam, it would bring a great deal of torture along with it. And there's an example in Ammar ibn Yasir, who lost his mother and father as shuhada because they were tortured to death by the kuffar of Quraysh, and he was also tortured along with them. But he uttered the words of disbelief, so they left him alone. He renounced his Islam. And when he went to the Prophet ﷺ, he was so torn and he was so sad. And he told the Prophet ﷺ about what happened. And Allah revealed this verse. And the Prophet ﷺ told him, "In adu fa'ud." If they come and do this to you again, then go ahead and say the words of disbelief once again. This is a case of darura and necessity. Just to give you one example from our times. Just to give you one example of this concept from our times. مَا نَهَيْتُكُمْ عَنْهُ فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ. That which is prohibited, avoid it. Is there an example that modern scholars take to allow something that is a haja, not a darura? It's a need, because with it, life would be greatly, people would be greatly inconvenienced in their lives. The example of that is in the mainstream opinion about having a credit card. According to the default ruling in Islam, having a credit card is something that is not allowed. Why? Because the agreement entails that under certain circumstances, you will pay interest. Well, you say, well, what if I don't pay the interest? Isn't it okay? No, but you've agreed to pay interest under certain circumstances. And that's why the normal ruling is it's problematic. But however, mainstream scholars, many scholars, hardly anyone actually says that you need to avoid credit cards entirely even today, looked at the circumstances of people who, if you do not have credit cards, your life will be inconvenienced. You could live, but it'll be hard. It'll be hard to rent an apartment. It'll be hard to get a phone. It'll be hard to even buy a house. Oh, that's out of the question if you don't have a credit card, because you won't have credit history. But they caveat that if you do get a credit card, you have to pay it on time, because if you fall into riba and it's due to your negligence, you fall into sin. So that's an example for this concept. But I don't want to make it a fiqh class. I just wanted you to understand those words. مَا نَهَيْتُكُمْ عَنْهُ فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ. There's a lot of detail there in our sharia. Our scholars take a lot of ahkam from this issue. The next issue that the the scholars mention that is understood from this hadith is a principle that directs many of the teachings of the faith. And that is al-mashaqqatu tajlibu at-taysir. That when there is a difficult circumstance, difficulty warrants ease, right? And they mention an example for that. How Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in certain cases, allowed something that is normally not allowed at all. And an example is fasting for someone who travels. Something for the Muslim during the day of fasting, of course it's haram to break your fast. But because there's great difficulty in fasting, commonly, or at least in many cases, especially traveling during their times, there was great difficulty in fasting and traveling. There's a rukhsa, a dispensation, to abandon fasting while traveling. Now that's the end of the fiqhi stuff that I wanted to share with you. I want to go into the rest of the hadith. And that is the cause of ruin of nations. This issue of asking questions. Does Islam encourage research, discovery? Does Islam encourage having an inquisitive mind? What do you think is the answer to that? Okay, sure. Are there any details to that, or is it just a plain yes? Of course, as with everything we discuss, there's always details. There's always details. And this is very important attitude to have towards knowledge and towards life in general. never to be a person who lives by generalizations. Because with everything that is general, there's tons of details that follow it. And the more you understand those details, the more you'll find that you become a person of understanding. And you find that you're a person that's not quick to judge something and quick to give an answer for something, because you realize that things aren't black and white. And there's hardly anything in life that's black and white. Right? Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about the virtue of asking. And the Prophet ﷺ also gives us the virtue of having an inquisitive mind. The verse states, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. There is encouragement to ask those who know when you don't. And the Prophet ﷺ tells us about the severity of acting without asking, without seeking the answer. And we discussed that hadith, and that was the hadith of a group of companions who traveled. And during their travel, one of their companions was struck with a rock in his head, and he got a wound, and they slept the night. He bandaged his wound. They slept during the night, and he had a nocturnal emission. What does nocturnal emission mean? That means he had to perform ghusl. That means he had to do a full body wash. So when he woke up, it was time to pray. And he asked his companions, do you know of any dispensation, any rukhsa? Is there any way I can avoid washing my back? Because it's cold. Imagine the cold in the desert night. So they said, we don't know of any rukhsa. We don't know of anything that you have to wash. If you're going to pray fajr, you have to perform the full body wash. So he did this, and he washed his wound, and it got infected, and he ended up dying. And the Prophet ﷺ severely reprimanded them for doing that. قَتَلُوهُ قَتَلَهُمُ اللَّهُ أَلَا سَأَلُوا إِذْ لَمْ يَعْلَمُوا. The Prophet ﷺ says, in the very end of the hadith, فَإِنَّمَا شِفَاءُ الْعِيِّ السُّؤَالِ. The cure for someone who doesn't know is to ask. So does our deen encourage asking? Yes. And Ibn Abbas was asked, how did you become so great in knowledge? And he said, بِلِسَانٍ سَؤُولٍ وَقَلْبٍ عَقُولٍ. The way I've gained, the knowledge I've gained, is by having an inquisitive mind. I ask a lot of questions. And also, بِقَلْبٍ عَقُولٍ وَقَلْبٍ عَقُولٍ, and a very deep understanding for things. I'm a person who thinks of things with nuance and depth. Right? So anyway, and he wasn't praising himself, he was just giving the students instruction, of course. So our deen encourages asking. And we mentioned that the hadith only raised issues with the companions asking because it was the time of revelation. And they needed to be careful what they asked. Because the Prophet ﷺ did not want them to fall into what one nation fell into. There's a story in the Quran that mentions the consequences of asking a lot of questions and not following up with compliance with the answers. And what is that story? Yes, the story of Al-Baqarah. In Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that Bani Israel was asked to do something, and they did not fulfill what they were asked to do. Instead, they asked another question. And after getting the answer, they asked another question. And then after asking that question, after getting the answer, they asked another question. And when they were given the answer, if it wasn't for the will of Allah, they would have never been able to comply. And they would have been punished for not complying. Now the reason why they did this, by the way, is because of a disease in their heart. Is it okay to ask questions? Yes. But when you're asking questions, make sure you observe yourself. Are you following your mind, and are you making your hawa your Lord? أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ. Are you being a slave to your mind and a slave to your whims? Because sometimes when people ask, they ask from a point of dissension and criticism. They ask with a very condescending attitude when it comes to religious things that they cannot understand. That if my mind cannot comprehend it, it makes absolutely no sense, and it's foolish talk. I don't care if it's the Prophet who said it, or the Quran that said it, or some scholar that said it. Some people have this attitude, and that's a very, very problematic attitude to have, because our scholars, they teach us, al-insan adu ma yajhal. The individual antagonizes what he cannot comprehend, and the believer is encouraged to continue to explore and ask until he understands. and to not antagonize what he cannot. So is asking a part of our deen? Absolutely. Because they say, السؤال نصف العلم, a good question is half of knowledge. And they say that the only thing that stops a person from learning and from asking, the only thing that stops a person from asking is one of two things. Is shyness or pride. Haya or kibr. The only thing that stops a person from asking, sometimes they live a lifetime, they don't want to ask for advice, they don't want to ask for help, they don't ask for guidance and instruction because they have one of those two things. What will people say about me? Or what will they think of me if they think I don't know, right? So this is the merit of, but now there's something here. As we said, during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet would restrict the companions from asking a lot of questions. There's a hadith that mentions that. نهينا أن نسأل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن شيء فكان يعجبنا أن يجيء الرجل من أهل البادية العاقل فيسأله ونحن نسمع. The hadith mentions that the people who lived in Medina with the Prophet ﷺ were restricted from asking a lot of questions because the Prophet ﷺ did not want hardship to come their way because of frequently asking, right? And because of that, when a visitor and a guest would come, the Prophet ﷺ would always allow guests to ask whatever they want because they don't have the luxury of being in the presence of the Prophet. They don't have the luxury of learning from his example. So he would let them ask as they please. And when someone would come as a guest, it's narrated that the companions would even approach that person, hoping that that person will go and ask the Prophet ﷺ certain questions that they themselves have on their mind. So this is the merit of questioning in Islam, but questioning within certain boundaries. There are certain things that we do not understand, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the knowledge of them exclusive to himself. There are certain things that we're prohibited to ask about. There's a beautiful hadith, and I want to share this with you. There's a lot of wisdom in this. There's a hadith that one time the Prophet ﷺ stood up and he said to the companions, "Saluni amma shi'tum." The Prophet ﷺ said to the companions, "Ask me whatever you want." The Prophet ﷺ, the beginning of the hadith actually asks, سئل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم عن أشياء كرهها فلما أكثر عليه غضب ثم قال للناس سلوني عما شئتكم. So the hadith says the Prophet ﷺ was asked about certain things, and he disliked those questions that he was being asked. And he said to the people when they began asking a lot of questions, he said to them, سلوني عما شئتم. Ask about whatever you want. So one man stood up and he said to the Prophet ﷺ, من أبي يا رسول الله? Who is my father, O Prophet of Allah? من أبي يا رسول الله? For the Prophet ﷺ said to him, أبوك حذافة. Your father is حذافة. فقام آخر فقال من أبي يا رسول الله؟ فقال أبوك سالم مولى شيبة. فلما رأى عمر ما في وجه رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من الغضب قال يا رسول الله إنا نتوب إلى الله. Sisters in the back left corner, we can hear you up here. Jazakumullah khair. If you want to speak, please speak outside. Jazakumullah khair. So the Prophet ﷺ began getting very upset, and Umar noticed. So he immediately said to the Prophet ﷺ, "We repent, O Prophet of Allah. Inna natubu, ya Rasulullah, inna natubu ilallah. We realize that we've upset you. We repent." Why did the Prophet ﷺ get so upset at this question? This man came and asked the Prophet ﷺ, "Who is my father?" Why did he ask this question? Is because there was some rumors around Medina that this son, that Hudhafa, Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Hudhafa, his father wasn't actually Hudhafa. And these rumors hurt him and bothered him. So he saw this as an opportunity to finally get it off his chest. He wanted certainty. You can't get more certain than the Prophet ﷺ saying to you something that is more powerful than certainty itself, because it's coming by revelation. He wanted the answer, he wanted to get the concerns off his chest, and he wanted to be relieved. So when he went back home, this hadith is funny because there's one of the narrations that shows us the reaction of Hudhafa, Abdullah bin Hudhafa. So when he went back home, the hadith mentions that Abdullah bin Hudhafa said to her son the following. She said to him, "ما سمعت بابن أعق أَحَقُّ قَطُّ مِنْكَ. I've never seen a son who's more disobedient and commits greater uquq than you. And then she said to him, أَأَمِنْتَ أَن تَكُونَ أُمَّكَ قَدْ قَارَفَتْ بَعْضَ مَا تُقَارِفُهُ نِسَاءُ أَهْلِ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ. Were you sure that your mother did not make, in her days before Islam, did not make some of the mistakes that the women in Jahiliyyah made? What were you trying to do by asking this question? Of course, she did not do anything wrong. But what did you want to get out of asking this question? The response to this type of question is of no benefit to you. This is something that we need to be careful of. Sometimes there are certain things that have been made concealed from you. And if you open those doors, they'll only bring you heartache. And again, that brings us back to the verse that we said. Don't ask about things that if they were made known to you, they'll bring you great discomfort and inconvenience. So she told her son this, and this is an example about how the companions asked the Prophet ﷺ a series of questions that made him ﷺ very upset. Now, this shows us, is it good to ask questions? Absolutely. Should I have a certain attitude? Should I make sure I have a certain attitude when I'm asking questions? Yes. Always ask questions with the intention of actually learning the answer, not with a condescending attitude, especially when it comes to issues of deen. And make sure that you avoid certain types of questions that you've been prohibited to ask. So there's an example. There's examples of things that you should not ask about. For the companions during the life of the Prophet ﷺ, is about asking for miracles. The Quran prohibits this type of question, because if you ask for a miracle and then you don't fulfill the rights of being given that miracle, you'll be punished, right? قال فإني منزلها عليكم فمن يكفر بعد منكم فإني أعذبه عذابا لا أعذبه أحدا من العالمين. You want food from Jannah? You will get food from Jannah. But then, if you do not obey after being given this miracle, food from Jannah directly, if you see that clear-cut sign and you still disobey, then know for certain that you'll be punished like no one has ever been punished before, right? So this is a type of question that you should never ask. Another type of question that you should never ask is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made from the mutashabih, something that you haven't been given clarity on. And this is something that the Quran addresses. Surah Ali Imran, the 3rd chapter of the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِم مَرَضٌ فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِم زَيْغٌ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ مَا تَشَابَهَ مِنْهُ. There are certain individuals that when it comes to issues that have been left unclear, they seek those issues. Instead of following, some people, most of the teachings are clear and understandable. And some people, instead of looking at those clear teachings of the deen, they single out those areas of misconception. They pursue those issues of doubt. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the reason they do that, instead of following the clear-cut teachings of the deen and incorporating its clear-cut teachings in their lives, they follow ma tashabah. Why do they do that? Because there's a disease in their hearts. Ask questions? Yes. But make sure that you're not asking it with a disease in your heart. Make sure you're asking about things that it's okay for you to ask about. So this is another beautiful thing that the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us in this hadith. He's guiding us how to seek knowledge. He's guiding us to what attitude should you have towards Allah's revelation to you. So this is one of the fundamentals in this hadith, and there's a lot of detail beyond that. But I feel that this is a good overview of the hadith and a good summary of many of its lessons, especially its spiritual lessons. And you see how one statement of the Prophet ﷺ kept us here for how long, Shaykh Ammar? Maybe 45 minutes? I would say at least 45 minutes. It kept us here for a good 45 minutes. One statement of our dearly beloved Prophet ﷺ. Brothers and sisters, if you spend your lifetime trying to learn all of the words of our dearly beloved Prophet ﷺ, it would not be enough. But the more you learn of those words, the more you'll find the nur of wisdom will fill your hearts. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those who understand our deen, its foundations and its details, and who connect with our dearly beloved Prophet ﷺ and his teachings. Allahumma ameen, Allahumma ameen. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Does anyone have a question that they'd like to ask? I know people are leaving. Does anyone have something that they'd like to ask? Any questions? Yes. Uh-huh. This is a very good. No, it's a similar topic, and this actually relates to something I didn't mention. It. We need to reconstruct our minds. Um, yes. So he's asking about a verse in the Quran that says, "And do not follow that which you have no knowledge of. ولا تقف ما ليس لك به علم. إن السمع والبصر والفؤاد كل أولئك كان عنه مسؤولا." What can I do with? How does this issue relate? Uh, uh, in one of the khutab I mentioned this actually, reconstruction of our minds. Many of us function in a way that entails doing what our minds dictate and our hawa dictates and then searching for the solution later on. This is a very, very, very problematic attitude to have. So many people do that. They enter into a business, they enter into a relationship. Is it halal? Is it haram? I have no idea. When am I going to ask? When I fall into a bind. I'm going to go to a sheikh. If the first sheikh doesn't tell me halal, I'm going to go to a second sheikh and third sheikh. Come on, shuyukh, halilu liyaha. Give me some way to make it halal, right? So this person, this is a very wrong attitude. وَلَا تَقْفُ. Don't follow that which you have no. Bab al-ilmu qabla al-qawli wal-amal. Know with certainty that what you're doing is okay, and then follow through with actions before you say anything, before you do anything after that. So this is very important, because some people, they'll say, Wallah, we're living in America and riba is everywhere, and if I don't do this in my business, then I'm not going to be able to make money. Like, look, everyone else is making a lot of money. I'm going to engage in riba, and I'm going to make a lot of money, and I'm going to support the masjid. Yeah, this person, his understandings are very off. His understanding is munharif, because this person trying to go from making 50,000 a year to making 100,000 a year by engaging in riba. Is this okay? No, this is min tahsiniyat. These are luxuries for you to go from making 50,000 where you'll be able to live at least and support yourself or maybe your wife or your spouse along with you. And then try to make it okay for you so you get a nice car and at least a $30,000 car, a $40,000 car. Is this okay? No, it's not okay for you to fall into debt and credit card debt and interest and so on and so forth in the name of luxury. That just as an example. So it absolutely relates to it. Allah Alam. Does anyone else have another question or comment that they know? Mm-hmm. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Mm-hmm. 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 Okay, he's asking a two-pronged question. It's a little detailed. So he's basically asked, the first part of the question is, what about the things that Islam hasn't directly addressed? Is the default ruling in them that they're allowed? هل الأصل في الأشياء الإباحة? Is the default that they are allowed? There's another hadith in the 40 that mentions this explicitly, and that is that if the default ruling in things is that they are halal and that there's ibaha until there comes clear reason. Does this have to do with the other issue about scholars addressing certain issues that weren't during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, by way of analogy, taking a verse or a hadith and finding and comparing this to that and finding that there's a common factor between them, and for that saying that this issue is haram or this issue is halal or this issue is wajib or this issue is kada, is there any conflict between these two? Absolutely not. ما فعله العلماء هو عين ما وجه به النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. This is exactly what the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم instructed to do. Islam is dynamic. Its teachings are dynamic in nature. If the teachings of Islam were set in stone and limited to 7th century Arabia, then you and I would not be able to find the answer to many of the things that we face in life. But Islam has an answer for all of those things, either directly through nas min al-kitab or sunnah, or indirectly through qiyas and analogy or qawl min aqwal al-ulama, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of detail there, and that's academic detail. But the default ruling in things is that they are allowed, and the evidence needs to be brought to show that they are haram. Any other question that we have before we close? Mm-hmm. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. So he's asking again something that I kind of addressed. The first thing, he's asking, this prohibition of asking was during the time of the Prophet ﷺ because revelation was continuing. Does that mean that we should walk away with the understanding from the hadith, that we should not ask about things from the deen? No, 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 that's not the understanding. Yes, there was specific concern of the companions asking things, but this hadith also tells us that there are certain things that you must ask about, or you should ask about, and things that you should not ask about, right? There are certain things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sataraha, akhfaha ank. These are things that are in people's hearts. These are things that, like the individual who commits fornication. The scholars, they mention that it's prohibited for the person to expose themselves and announce that they've committed fornication, unless it's of course for advice or counseling, that's a different issue. That's another example. There are certain things that you should not ask about. Like this companion, Sayyidina Abdullah bin Hudhafa. He asked the Prophet ﷺ, "An Abi, who's my father?" And there's other things about relating to shara'i' and relating to ma huwa fard, ma huwa haram. These things relating to your deen, what is the ruling of the deen concerning this and concerning that? No, you must ask about these, because like you said, الشريعة قد اكتملت. The sharia is complete. All right, so there are certain things you should ask about and other things you should not. All right. So, and an example of another thing you should not is the Prophet ﷺ walked in on the companions and they were speaking of qadar. They were speaking about divine decree. And they were getting into a lot of details, certain things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not made known to us about the details of qadar. So the Prophet ﷺ walked in and he was so upset. أَبِهَذَا أُمِرْتُمْ, is this what you were asked to discuss? About the details of why Allah does what He does? You were not commanded to discuss this. There are certain things that Allah has informed you of why He does certain things. You take that. You try to reflect on it. You understand it. Other things that you cannot make sense of, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed them to happen here. Be careful of the way you speak about them, and be careful of stepping over your boundaries. Right. So there, yeah, you had, who was about to speak? Yeah, so it's very important to know this about your sharia. Your sharia is very vast. The scholars, they teach us that النصوص متناهية والوقائع غير متناهية. The texts in the Quran and Sunnah are limited in number, but the possible circumstances that can arise in the lives of people are endless. So for this reason, there are certain principles the Prophet ﷺ has set to, and this is why we're talking about principles and foundations of Islam. The Prophet ﷺ has set, and he gave those instructions to the companions. How to deal with things that you cannot find a verse about or a hadith about. Do you think that when there was no verse or there's no hadith, that's it? Our scholars, they folded their hands like this and said, there's nothing, so do what you want. No, the Sharia of Islam was the basis for an entire civilization for over 1,000 years. Right? No, they had answers to those questions. And they knew the system of how to find the answers to those questions. It wasn't by their whims and their hawa. It was by the teachings of the Quran and teachings of the Sunnah that inspired that entire system. Allah alam. So, any other question? بارك الله فيكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.